Whether you want to patch up a family heirloom quilt or just practice making some easy quilt blocks, you can draft your own quilt block patterns just like I did for my first quilt. So get out some crayons and some graph paper because today you're going to learn how to draft your own quilt block patterns. There are two main ways to draft patterns for your quilts, but let's start with the method where you use fabric you already have because I have a ton of quilting fabric right here already. I have 4 different colors of fabric, all with the same print. So I know I need to design a simple quilt block to help these prints shine. And since this fabric depicts a boy and a girl standing up, that means this print has one correct direction. And I don't want my print sitting upside down or sideways, so I'm going to draft my pattern using only squares and rectangles to help orient that print upwards properly. Color, print, and direction of prints are all important factors to consider when drafting a pattern for a quilt. I'm going to showcase this gorgeous print by alternating blocks of blue and green. I'm going to use yellow for sashing and red for the cornerstones. Once you figure out your pattern, start drafting your blocks onto your graph paper using your finished quilt block size. I need 6-inch square green and blue blocks, 2-inch square red blocks, and 6-inch by 2-inch yellow sashing blocks. You can either add your seam allowances before or after you cut out your blocks. Then you can rearrange and line up all your pieces to figure out the best way to construct each block. The best way to construct my design is to sew a piece of yellow sashing to the green or blue block and a piece of sashing to the cornerstone, then to connect those two pieces. And I'll have to add an extra row of sashing and cornerstones along the top and one side of my quilt once the top is constructed. The second method you will use to draft your own quilt patterns is both a little bit simpler and more fun. You're just gonna draw out some quilt blocks until you find a pattern that you like. Maybe you want to make a monochrome sampler quilt using a bunch of similar colored scraps. You can practice windmills, stars, and even those pesky flying geese units. And once you've sketched all your quilt blocks onto graph paper, you can cut them out and rearrange them into an appealing design. And you might want to get rid of a few blocks at this time if they don't really match. And then you'll have to calculate yardage to go buy fabric. To calculate yardage for your quilt, first measure how tall and wide your quilt will be. I'm then going to divide both the length and width by the total width of a finished block, which is 8 inches. If you end up with a fraction, and you probably will, then round down because you don't want to work with half quilt blocks. So my quilt will be 1 block wider than my sketch. And if you multiply these numbers, you will get the total number of blocks needed in the quilt. So I will need 30 green and blue blocks all together. If you divide that by half, I need 15 of each. And I will also need 42 yellow blocks. And I will also need the same number of red blocks as I would yellow. Then divide the total length and width of your fabric by the length and width of your block, including seam allowances. If you can multiply those two numbers together and get a number that is equal to or greater than the number of blocks you need, you will have enough fabric. To calculate how much fabric to buy, start with the width of your fabric. Then divide that by the width of your block plus seam allowance. That's the number of blocks you will be able to fit across the width of your fabric. Now take the total number of blocks you need and divide that by the number of blocks you can fit across the width of your fabric. That is how many blocks you will need vertically across the length of your fabric. Now multiply that number by the length of your block, including seam allowances. And you'll get the total number of inches of fabric you will need to buy. I would just round this up to 1 yard. So if I wanted to buy fabric for 42 yellow sashing blocks, I would need to buy about 1 yard of fabric. But since I have like 2 or 3, I know I have plenty already. And if none of that math made sense to you, you can always just take the approach of drafting your pattern, cutting out as many blocks as will fit out of the fabric you have, and then just add some nice fun colors in there if you don't have enough at the end. And that's how you draft your own quilt patterns. If you can come up with an idea, you can make it. If drafting your own quilt pattern seems a little bit daunting or the whole process is just confusing, then just start small. Make a wall hanging or a pillow or a table runner to start. I've been really wanting to make a quilt with this fabric for a while now, and drafting a pattern for it was the first step. So if you want to see what this quilt looks like when it's done or learn more about the quilt making process, then make sure you subscribe to my channel so you don't miss those videos when they come out. Leave a like on this video if you haven't already, and let me know down in the comments if you want to try drafting your own quilt patterns. Thank you for watching my video, everyone. I'll see you guys next week.